You can draw this in Procreate. In this You Can Draw This video, we will be drawing this wintry scene and we'll be using the brushes that are already in Procreate, plus a special pine tree brush, which you can download for free through the link in the description. This tutorial will be a bit more challenging, but I'm sure that you can do it if you just follow the video all the way till the end. And don't forget, you can always pause and rewind, just take your time. And once you're done, don't forget to share your work on Instagram and tag me in the image. That way I will be able to find your work and perhaps we'll see your artwork in the next You Can Draw This video. Are you ready? Let's get started. First of all, our canvas is 3000 pixels by 2000 pixels. And I have created a color palette in case you want to use the exact same colors I'm using in this video. First thing we'll do is drop in a color. We'll pick this first color in the color palette and we'll drop in the color by dragging in the circle onto the screen. And now let's create a new layer on top of this one by clicking the plus in the layer palette. And on this layer, we will create our snow. And for our snow, we will pick this fourth color in the color palette. And for our brush, we will use the monoline brush, which you can find under calligraphy. And our brush size is set to 20%, but this doesn't really matter. It's just a matter of personal preference. I'll zoom out a little bit so I'll be able to see the edges of the canvas. And let's start drawing just below halfway of the canvas and make a hilly shape like this. And now we will fill this shape. And if you're having trouble when you're using that color drop, because maybe your entire canvas is filling, or maybe you see a little gap between your fill and your line work, then just drop in the color, hold your pen, and then you can move from left to right to adjust the color drop threshold. So if you go all the way to the right, it'll fill entirely, and if you go all the way to the left, well, nothing really happens in this case. But if you have line art that's a bit, well, that has some gaps, for instance, if you use a chalk, then using that color drop threshold is very handy. And of course, you can still use the brush to adjust your hilly shape a bit, add a little bit more wobbles, or perhaps use the eraser to erase some parts until you're happy with your snow shape. Now let's go back to our first layer, that dark blue layer, and work on that sky a bit because it's very dark right now. Let's lighten it up. We will use an airbrush for that. We use the soft brush, which you can find under airbrushing. I have the brush size set to 25% and the opacity is at 40%. And let me grab some lighter colors. First, I'll pick this second color in the color palette, that bright blue. And let's just go over the sky and add some of that lighter blue. And since we are using a low opacity, you can make multiple strokes, slowly building that color up. And now let's pick an even lighter color. Let's pick that third color in the color palette. And let's add some more light here on the right side. Like that. And of course you can use the Gaussian blur, which you can find under that magic wand. You can just hold your pen on the screen and slide it to the right to blur this layer a bit. I'll just use like 5 or 6%. That way you can make a softer transition. Now let's add some trees to our scene. We will add those trees on a layer below our snow layer. That way they won't be covering that snow. So I've clicked the plus while having layer 1 selected. And that way you get a new layer between layer 1 and 2. And we will be using a special pine tree brush, which you can download for free through the link in the description. It's the pine tree long brush. And be sure to enter a 0 when you try to download it. That way you can get it for free. Just follow the instructions. Now let's pick a color for our trees. Let's pick this color right here. The first color in the second line in the color palette. I have the opacity of the brush set to 100% and the size is at, well, I can barely see it, but I think it's 35%. But you can play around with that, of course. Now let's fill our horizon with trees. They'll just have various sizes. You can just go over that horizon and add multiple trees. And be sure that that bottom, that's entirely covered. You don't have gaps there. This looks good. Now I'd like to go back to our snow layer and add some more detail there. If you are afraid to ruin your snow layer, you could just make a new layer on top of your snow layer, or you can just paint on that snow layer. That's what I'm going to do, but if you feel a bit insecure, just make a new layer so you can always remove it if you don't like it. For our brush, we are going to the painting section and we'll be using the Oriental brush. And for the color, we'll pick this fifth color in the color palette. It's a nice bright color. And the opacity is set to 100% and the size of the brush is, well, around 1%, but you can still move around inside that 1%, so just try and play around with it yourself. And we are going to add some light to our snow. Just make these slightly diagonal strokes across that snow with some tiny gaps in some places. And this is the sunlight hitting that snow. And we'll go to somewhere near the middle. And you can make some little horizontal strokes right here. Adding some dabs of light. And maybe a little one here. And now let's also move to a darker color. That's this color in the color palette. And let's add some darker touches as well. This is where we'll make a larger tree later on. So we're adding a little bit of shadow. Well, let me make the brush a little bit smaller. We're already at 1%, but it can go even smaller. And I'll just add a little bit of shadow near these trees. Making these slightly horizontal strokes. And some on the left side. And at the same time, it's giving a little bit of texture to our snow. This is a great start. Now let's use this same brush to work on our trees. Of course, they just look very, well, repetitive. These are all the same trees. We want some variation and some more realism there. So let's make a layer above our tree layer. This time I am making a new layer because I do want to be able to erase any of the snow that I'll be painting if I don't like it. I'll still be using that Oriental brush and I'll keep it at the same size. This time I will be using this second color in the color palette right here, and we are going to add snow to our trees. Let's zoom in a little bit and let's make these short strokes And this is the snow that's lying on top of these branches of these pine trees. And just go from the bottom to the top, making these strokes a little bit smaller. And then all the way to the top, covering that top of the tree. Then you can go to the one in front and make sure that you keep those dark gaps, that shadow between the branches. Don't just go and cover that entire tree with the snow, because that way it won't look realistic anymore. And you don't have to follow the branches of that pine tree brush. Just go ahead and paint over them, making these slightly diagonal strokes all the way to the top. We have a tree behind these two. And I'd suggest not just to go from right to left, but skip some trees every once in a while so you can make a tree that's in front of the others. So this one will be a bigger one, and then you can move to the right again, work on those trees. That way it'll be more dynamic. Just keep repeating this for all the trees. And since you're working on a separate layer, well, if you don't like what you're doing, you can always just erase it and try again. Just don't give it too much thought. Just try to make these kinds of strokes, making them smaller as you go to the top, then cover that top. Because then when you zoom out, it's already starting to look like trees covered in snow. And just don't forget to leave some of those dark gaps. Don't cover it entirely with snow. Since we'll be pretty much repeating this process, let me just speed up the video a bit. If you want to learn more about painting realism in Procreate, then I really think you'd like my Patreon page, because there I share a lot more videos about painting realistically. And there I take you through the process from sketch to finished painting. And of course there I also share a lot of brushes, working files, reference images, color palettes, and I'm always available if you need tips, feedback, or just want to chat. Now, all our trees are covered in snow, but I want to add a light touch. You can see how the light is hitting the snow, and that light will also be hitting those trees. So I'll pick this light color, which we also use for the snow, and let's add some light touches. You can still just work on the same layer, or you can make a new layer if you feel a bit uncomfortable working on this layer. If you're afraid that you might mess something up, just use a new layer just to be sure. So with this lighter color, we'll add some more light touches. And we're just going over the tops. And what you could do if you are afraid of adding too much of this light snow or making it all too big, you can actually turn on alpha lock on this layer. That way you will only be able to add this light to the snow that you've already painted here. So like you can see, I won't be able to paint any snow outside of that snow that's already there. And like I said, I'm just painting the tops adding light to the tops of these trees. Still making short, small strokes. Going from the right to the left, letting the light hit those tips of the trees. Now we have created a great backdrop for our big tree that we will start drawing now. For the brush, we will go to the drawing brushes and we will use gloaming. And for the color, we will use this very dark color right here. That's the third color in the second line in the color palette. And now let's make a layer for our tree. We can make the tree on top of all the other layers because it'll be in the foreground. So let's go to layer 2 first and then click the plus to make a new layer. And like I said, we'll be using the gloaming brush. And let's set the size to around 17%. And the opacity is at 100%. And let's start about here and start drawing the base of the tree. I want it to go all the way up there. Let's give it a bit of thickness, that tree trunk. Just make sure that the bottom is a bit broader. And then we'll go up like that. That's just the base of our tree. It looks kind of sad this way. And now let's start adding branches. I'll start at the top, making some really small little branches. And as we go down, we will make these branches bigger. Don't give too much thought to the shape. And these branches, they will hang down a little bit because there is snow on top of them. And that snow, that's pretty heavy. So they are hanging down a little bit. And we will be drawing that snow on top, so don't worry too much about the shape. Just make these branches hanging down, and you want some gaps. You want to see through that tree a little bit. So you don't want to cover everything entirely. And these branches, they get bigger as we move towards the bottom of the tree. And remember, you can always just pause the video, rewind it, check these shapes, try to mimic these movements. Let me move to the bottom of the tree here. I want to make a big branch going all the way to there. And some big branches on this side. And a branch going down here at the front. And don't worry about getting it super tidy. When we are going to add the snow later on, we will add more realism to this tree. Oh, I see I messed up a little bit over there. Let me remove that. And also be sure to vary the shapes of these branches a little bit. Don't go making like a mirrored tree with the same branches on the left and the right. It'll look more organic and more realistic if you vary it a little bit. So this is roughly the shape of our tree. Add a little bit. Yeah, this is roughly the shape of our tree. Let me just show it on a white background. There, so this is the shape of our tree right now. It's pretty rough, but you can just pause the video right here and try to copy a shape that is similar to this. And then we can continue and add snow to our tree. We'll do that on a new layer. So click the plus to make a new layer. And we are going to use a lighter color. We are going to use this color in our color palette. And for our brush, we will be using the Oberon brush, which is also in the drawing section. The size is set to around 2% and the opacity is at 100%. And now let's start covering this tree with snow. I'll start at the top, adding some snow to that tip. And just like with the trees in the background, do be sure to not just cover everything with snow. Make sure that you still see that dark undertone of that tree. And here you'll start seeing more of that, of those little branches. We're not just following the shape exactly, but we're also making some smaller shapes, which indicate those tiny branches on the tree. And we'll just make our way down the tree and make sure that you place that snow on the top of the branches, not at the bottom, because snow will stick to the top of the branches. And often not on the bottom, because, of course, you do have some exceptions. Perhaps in a big storm, it'll also be covering the undersides of the branches, but usually snow falls on the top of the branches. Let me speed up the video a bit while I continue covering these branches with snow. And now we've covered the entire tree, and I'd like to add some lighter patches here. So I'll pick this lighter color right here in the color palette. And I'll have some light hitting these parts, just on some sides of the branches. And of course that light is hitting the top of that snow and not the bottom of the branches. And we can even go a little bit lighter, pick that very light color. But let's make our brush a little bit smaller. Let's go to just below 2%. So that's 1%, but 1% can be a big 1% and a small 1%, if you get what I mean. Let's just add a little bit of light, a little bit of brighter light to that top, to some of those tops of the branches. And you can see that if we look up close, it looks really messy, but once you zoom out, it does look like a tree covered in snow. And that's what we want. Now, as a final touch for our painting, I would like to work on the background, on the sky. So let's go to the sky layer. Let's click layer 1. And we can either work directly on this layer, or we can just make a new layer and play safe. So let's click the plus to make a new layer. And I'd like to go to the soft brush, which you can find under airbrushing. I will make it pretty small. Perhaps 10%. Let me check. No, we can go even smaller. Let's go for 3%. 3%. Yeah, that's nice. And I want to add some light strokes to our background. Let's pick this color right here. And let's add some light diagonal strokes to our background, lightening up that sky. Using very light pressure. The opacity is still at 40% for this brush. Just adding some, well, it's like clouds, misty clouds. And let me also use the clouds brush, which you can find under elements. Here's the clouds brush, and we'll keep it at the same color, and the size is set to 18%. And let's just add some clouds to the sky. And we can make the brush a bit smaller, let's say 10% for some smaller clouds. And now I would like to blur this layer. We'll go to the magic wand and pick Gaussian blur. Now just slide your pen to the right and blur this layer a bit. I'm going for 6.8%. And next I would like to add lots of starry. I would like to add lots of stars to our sky. I'll do that on a layer below those clouds that we just made. So we'll go to layer 1, click plus, and for our brush we will go to the luminance brushes and use the glimmer brush. Let's click that brush to see the settings. I have set spacing to max, jitter to max, and when you go to shape, you can see that I've also set scatter to max. Now click done. Let's just keep it at this color. And the size, I'll set that to 3%. And I'll just cover the entire sky, well, mostly the top part of the sky, with these stars. And now let's make our brush a little bit bigger. Let's say 8% to add some bigger stars. Not too much, just some. And finally, I would like to add the suggestion of snowflakes. We'll do that on a layer above that cloud layer that we just made. So we'll click layer 7 first, then click the plus. And for our brush, we will go to the airbrushing set again and use the soft airbrush. I have the opacity of the brush set to 60% and the size is at 20% right now, but you can play around with that. Let's just add some very blurry snowflakes. Let's add some very blurry snowflakes, as if they are out of focus. Just pick some random spots to add these. And we can make the brush a little bit smaller, let's say 10%, to add some of these snowflakes that seem a bit less out of focus. And we can pick that lighter color, this one right here in the color palette. Go even smaller, let's say 5% for the smallest of snowflakes. There, you did it! Thanks for following this You Can Draw This video tutorial. I hope you have enjoyed it. I'm looking forward to seeing your work on Instagram. Don't forget to share it. And if you have enjoyed following this tutorial, then you might like my other You Can Draw This videos as well. You could start with these two over here. I'll see you next time.